HOA extorted $450,000 from my grandfather's farm. They thought they could steal from my family quietly. They thought they could bury the truth under fake fines and intimidation. They thought I would back down. They didn't know who they were dealing with. My name is Jake Morrison, and this is the story of how one HOA president's greed destroyed her empire, and how I reclaimed everything she tried to take from us. It started with a letter, a crisp envelope with the HOA logo, slipped under my door at dawn. Outstanding dues, $450,000. My heart stopped. I stood there in the kitchen, the sun barely rising over my grandfather's fields, staring at numbers that made no sense. They claimed we owed fines for unauthorized structures, weed overgrowth, and infrastructure maintenance. All on a farm that had been in my family since before the HOA even existed. I called Patricia Whitmore, HOA president, queen of this small town empire. She picked up the phone with a cold, sweet voice. "Jake, it's all standard procedure." I asked her how they calculated these fines. She laughed, said, "You'll have to take it up with the board that she controlled." I drove past the old barn that morning, hands gripping the steering wheel, rage boiling under my skin. They were trying to force us out, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. That's when the notices started coming daily, certified letters, threats of liens, threats of foreclosure, all signed by Patricia. I could see the resort from our fence line, shiny new cabins. ATV buzzing, families on vacation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was built too close. One evening, I walked the boundary lines my grandfather marked decades ago. I measured, checked old survey pins, cross-referenced the deed. And then I found it, a stretch of land where the resort's tennis courts and cabins sat was on our property. I didn't tell Patricia, not yet. Instead, I went quiet. I started digging. I spent nights at the county recorder's office, flipping through dusty files, pulling plats, easements, and drilling records. I found Patricia's name over and over. On land sales, on boundary adjustments, on HOA legal documents. I found shell companies tied back to her, companies that purchased land for the resort, companies that received HOA payments for maintenance, companies that had been billing the HOA while sitting on land that legally belonged to us. I realized the $450,000 wasn't about dues. It was about forcing us to sell cheap so she could cover up her theft. The more I found, the angrier I got. One day, while checking fences, I found Patricia on a golf cart with her contractor, pointing at our land. I stepped out from the tree line. She froze. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she demanded, trying to sound calm. I just smiled, checking my property lines. She tried to laugh it off. "Don't worry about that. The HOA will handle it." I walked up to her, looked her dead in the eyes. "The HOA isn't taking this land." She didn't say a word, just turned her golf cart around and sped off. That night, they cut the locks on our equipment shed. Tools were stolen, graffiti sprayed on the barn, "Sell or else." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch, shotgun across my lap, watching the moon rise over the fields my grandfather bled to keep. I knew I needed allies, so I called in the family lawyer, brought in a private investigator from 2 towns over, talked to a county surveyor who hated the HOA. We started building a case quietly, patiently. Every document, every payment, every photo of encroachment, every deed, organized in a thick binder, the binder I would later drop on Patricia's table. The binder that would become her worst nightmare. She kept trying to pressure me, sending her enforcers, sending more fines, more threats. Every letter she sent went straight into the binder. I wanted her to feel confident. I wanted her to think she was winning. Because when it was time to strike, I wanted her completely unprepared. It wasn't just about the $450,000 anymore. It was about justice. It was about my grandfather's legacy. It was about every neighbor she had ever bullied. I was going to expose her, and I wasn't going to stop until she fell. And the entire town would be there to watch. But that was just the beginning. and Patricia had no idea what was coming for her next. I decided to hit Patricia where it hurt. Not with anger, not with threats, with proof. One morning, I drove to the county courthouse. I filed a lawsuit, boundary encroachment, fraud, racketeering. Patricia was served papers while she was having brunch at the resort's restaurant. They said she tried to keep her composure, but her face turned white as paper. Her friends stared as she read the first page, hands shaking. She left the restaurant in silence. The next week, her lawyer tried to scare me off. "Jake, you don't want this fight." I looked him in the eyes. "Watch me." The private investigator I hired found more. A hidden financial trail. Payments from the HOA account to Patricia's shell companies. Hundreds of thousands in maintenance fees. All while the HOA board was told these payments were for community upkeep. The truth, they were paying her to lease land that wasn't even theirs. Every neighbor she fined, every lien she filed, she used fear to fund her empire. I started talking to other homeowners. Carefully, one by one, I found retirees who were too scared to speak. Single parents who thought they'd lose their homes. Veterans who felt powerless against her threats. I told them what I found, showed them the documents, the photos, the maps. They were angry, and for the first time, they realized they weren't alone. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Patricia walked in, trying to act confident, clutching her leather binder. I stepped forward, holding my binder. The room fell silent. I started reading, line by line, payment by payment, violation by violation. Neighbors gasped as they heard how Patricia had been draining the HOA funds while claiming community improvements. I showed the maps proving the resort was on our land. I showed the county records linking Patricia's name to every shady deal. She tried to interrupt, tried to call me a liar. That's when I pulled out the last document, a lease agreement she signed with the resort's investors. Her signature, her handwriting. A lease for land she didn't own. Silence. Neighbors looked at her, eyes wide, mouths open. Patricia turned red, then pale, then red again. Someone in the back shouted, "Is this true, Patricia?" She tried to deny it, but the documents didn't lie. Someone else yelled, "We want our money back." That meeting ended in chaos. Patricia fled the building. Her lawyer tried to calm everyone, but it was too late. The community was awake now. Over the next few weeks we organized, neighbors formed a committee, we demanded a financial audit, we demanded transparency. Patricia tried to fight back. She filed restraining orders, sent cease and desist letters. But the tide had turned. I filed a motion in court to freeze her accounts. And it worked. The judge saw the evidence, saw the maps, the payments, the fraud. Patricia was forced to hand over the HOA financial records. What we found was worse than we imagined. Fake invoices, double billing, hidden payments, personal vacations charged to the HOA, thousands spent at restaurants and luxury stores. She wasn't just extorting me. She was extorting the entire neighborhood. The final blow came when we discovered her natural gas scheme. Patricia had signed a drilling lease with an energy company. On land she claimed was HOA common ground, land that was actually part of my family's farm. She was getting monthly payments while telling us there was no money for road repairs. That was it. The sheriff arrived at her house one morning. She was arrested for fraud, embezzlement, mail tampering, and racketeering. The local news covered it live. Neighbors watched from their porches as Patricia was led away in handcuffs. I stood at the fence line, watching. She looked back at me as they put her in the car. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I just nodded. Because it was never about revenge. It was about justice. And it was about protecting what my grandfather built. With Patricia gone, the HOA was dissolved. A new neighborhood association formed, run by neighbors, for neighbors, with full transparency. The land the resort built on. They tried to fight me in court, but the survey maps were clear. They were trespassing. They settled, paid me a hefty sum to lease the land legally. and I signed a new drilling lease with the energy company. The land that Patricia tried to steal, it now provides income for the farm. The farm my grandfather built, the farm Patricia tried to take. It's safe now, stronger than ever. Because when you stand up to bullies and when you have truth on your side, they can't take what's yours. This was my story. But it's also a warning to every HOA bully out there: don't mistake kindness for weakness. Don't mistake silence for surrender. Because when you push good people too far, they will push back. And sometimes they'll take everything you tried to steal. For my grandfather, for our family, for every neighbor Patricia ever threatened. This is how you end an HOA empire. And that, my friends, is only the beginning. I thought it was over, but Patricia's allies weren't done. There were whispers in the neighborhood that I was a troublemaker, a liar. Anonymous letters appeared in mailboxes, claiming I forged the documents, that I was stealing HOA money for myself. Some neighbors believed it. They stopped waving at me, crossed the street when I walked by. That hurt more than I expected. I grew up on this land. My grandfather taught me to plant corn here, taught me how to fix fences, fix engines, fix almost anything. But I couldn't fix the look in my neighbors' eyes. So I decided to show them the truth. I rented the town hall, paid for the chairs, the projector, the coffee, invited every neighbor personally. The night came. People filed in, arms crossed, faces skeptical. Patricia wasn't there. She was still out on bail, waiting for trial. But her allies came, sitting in the back row. I started the projector, slide by slide, bank records, survey maps, emails, videos from hidden cameras showing Patricia's meetings with resort developers. Evidence layered like bricks. Voices started rising in the room. Wait, that's her signature. That's my house in that picture. Someone shouted, she lied to us. An older man in a John Deere cap stood up, trembling. She threatened to take my house over $50 a month. I couldn't pay when my wife was sick. A single mother spoke up. She told me if I didn't pay the landscaping fine, she'd call CPS. Story after story poured out. I let them speak. They needed to. By the end of the night, the room was buzzing, not with anger at me, but with realization. They saw Patricia for who she truly was. And they saw me for who I truly was. Not a liar, not a troublemaker, but a neighbor who stood up when no one else could. The next day, people started coming by the farm with pies, coffee, handshakes, tears. Thank you, Jake, you saved us. That was the real victory. Patricia's trial finally came, courtroom packed, reporters at the door. She tried to put on a show, claimed she was innocent, claimed I was framing her. But the evidence spoke louder. Her own emails, her own signatures, her own voice on recordings. The jury didn't take long, guilty on all counts. Fraud, embezzlement, mail tampering, racketeering. She was sentenced to years in prison. She tried to glare at me as they led her away, but her eyes were empty. She knew it was over. After the verdict, I walked out of the courthouse, took a deep breath, looked up at the sky. It felt like my grandfather was there with me, patting my shoulder. Good job, kid. But the work wasn't done. We had to rebuild the neighborhood. We formed a new association. No more secret meetings, no more fake fines, no more fear. Neighbors voted for transparency, every payment documented, every meeting recorded. And me, I was asked to lead. At first, I said no, I didn't want the power. But then I thought about the single mothers, the veterans, the retirees. They needed someone who would protect them. So I said yes. Not because I wanted control, but because I wanted to protect what we fought for. The farm was safe now. The drilling lease we signed brought in steady income. Repairs were made, fences rebuilt, fields planted. The resort kept paying us monthly for the lease on the land they trespassed on. They tried to buy us out again. This time the offer was in the millions. I declined. because some things can't be bought. My grandfather's land, our family's legacy, the community we rebuilt. Those are priceless. And I knew Patricia would sit in her cell, thinking about the moment it all slipped away. The moment she realized she picked the wrong family, the wrong farm, the wrong man to extort. Because I didn't fight back with threats or violence. I fought back with truth, with community, with justice. And we won. That's the story of how we took down an HOA empire. How we saved our homes. How we rebuilt trust, neighbor by neighbor. And how we proved that when good people stand together, no bully can tear them down. Because this wasn't just about me or my family. It was about all of us. About every person who's ever been threatened by an HOA bully. About every family who's ever felt powerless. You're not powerless. You're not alone. And if you stand up, if you stand together, you can win. Just like we did. Because when you protect what's yours, when you refuse to back down, you honor every generation before you. And you protect every generation after. For my grandfather, for my neighbors, for our future. This is how we ended Patricia's reign of fear. This is how we saved our farm. And this is how we took back our lives. After Patricia went to prison, things didn't magically fix themselves overnight. We had years of damage to repair. Neighbors were still wary, afraid the next HOA president would turn into another Patricia. So, the first meeting of our new HOA was different. It wasn't in a fancy hall, no closed doors. We met in the field under the oak tree my grandfather planted. We sat in folding chairs, kids ran around, dogs barked in the distance, and we talked. Everyone spoke, no timers, no threats of fines. Stories poured out. One neighbor shared how Patricia threatened to foreclose on her house over a $90 fence fine. Another told us how he paid Patricia cash, believing it went to HOA dues, only to find out later she pocketed it. We cried, we laughed, we let it out. Because before we could rebuild, we had to heal. I stood up and told them, this land, this community, it's bigger than any one person. We're not going to let fear run this neighborhood again. We're going to protect each other. People clapped, some nodded, some just sat quietly, tears in their eyes. It was a start. We rewrote the bylaws together, line by line, no hidden clauses, no vague fines. Everything clear, everything fair. The money Patricia had stolen, the court ordered restitution. Slowly, checks came in, not enough to undo all the damage, but enough to fix the roads, repair the broken gates, plant new trees. One morning, I walked out to the field and saw something that made me stop. Neighbors working together, clearing brush, fixing fences, laughing. A kid rode by on his bike, waved at me and yelled, "Thank you, Mr. Jake." I waved back, my heart full. Because that's why we fought. Not just to take down Patricia, but to build something better. Something worth protecting. And as the farm healed, so did we. I took over the farming operations fully. We planted soybeans, corn, and hay. The drilling lease we secured brought in steady revenue. I used it to hire back some of the workers my grandfather once employed. We fixed up the old barn, painted it red again, hung up the American flag on the front. It felt like the farm was alive again. I walked the fields each morning, boots crunching on the dewy grass, thinking of my grandfather. How he would have smiled to see the farm thriving. One afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a note, "I'm sorry." No name, but I recognized the handwriting. Patricia, from her prison cell. I stood there for a while, holding that letter, feeling the weight of everything we had gone through. I didn't hate her. She made her choices and paid the price. But I wouldn't let her define our story. Our story was about survival, about community, about standing up when it mattered most, about refusing to let fear win, and about honoring the legacy of those who came before us. My grandfather used to say, Land is more than dirt, son. It's a promise. I finally understood what he meant. It was a promise to protect it, to care for it, to pass it on better than we found it. That's what we did. The HOA that tried to destroy us, gone. In its place stood a community that worked together, that cared for each other. Neighbors stopped by often for coffee, for advice, to share their dreams for their land. And the farm, it kept growing. Not just crops, but hope. We started hosting community days, hayrides for the kids, bonfires under the stars, neighbors playing guitars, singing old country songs. For the first time in a long time, people felt safe here. And when new families moved in, we welcomed them, told them our story. Not to scare them, but to remind them, never let one person take control of what belongs to all of us. Stand together. Protect what matters, because that's how you build a neighborhood worth living in. A place where kids can play without fear, where families can grow, where memories can be made. That's the true victory. Not the money, not the land, but the people, the community, the promise. So if you're out there fighting your own HOA nightmare, know this: you're not alone. Stand up, speak the truth, gather your neighbors, and protect what's yours. Because together you can win, just like we did.